Where do you think that you're kind of filling a void that they have?
Great question. So I think the first thing is we're really focusing on the most of the tools are small to mid-market. They're more recent tools. Many of them are Series A, Series B.
Welcome to the Financial Innovations Podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Villani. We're helping CFOs save money and time by implementing cutting-edge tools. Really excited to have this episode. I have the FP&A Guy with me, Paul Barnhurst. Paul, it's great to have you on the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you for a few minutes here, Daniel. So again, thanks for having me on the show.
Awesome. Well, I often get a bunch of questions in terms of, what are some great resources to go to for, just finance in general, finance technology. And, a lot of our other guests have turned to Google in cases like that. I thought it would be great to have you on the show because, when I point people to helpful resources, you're probably one of the top 5 people I'm referring people to in terms of resources. So I know you wanted to, you had a few things that we wanted to talk about here today. First, I wanted to just kind of talk through the podcast that you have and, what might be helpful for our audience. So you want to talk a little bit about the Financial Modelers Corner podcast?
Sure. So, I have two, FP&A Today and Financial Modelers Corner. The Financial Modelers Corner is the more recent one. And that one's really helping people to, about financial modeling, obviously. We bring in guests all over the world. We've brought in guys who have won actually the World Cup in financial modeling, brought in people who have spent their career training people, and just discussing how to think about modeling, how to be better at it, both the science of it and the art. Because if anyone who's done modeling knows there's no code to ensure every time the model is right? There's a lot of art to it. What assumptions do you use and how big of an impact do they have, which is often bigger than we'd like to admit, but that's another story. So, that's a little bit about the show. I have a great sponsor we use for that and really enjoy doing it. We typically 45-minute episodes, and we've had people all over the world from, the history of modeling to dynamic arrays to, people competing in Excel esports on ESPN.
No, that's great. And in my excitement to jump in and, talk through the resources, I forgot to ask you if you want to just give a quick minute to introduce yourself, how you got into the space and, any of your, goals or anything like that.
Sure. I'll share a little bit about how I got into space. So, FP&A, really after grad school is when I started in FP&A. I did a finance emphasis in my MBA. First 2 years I did report writing. An opportunity came up to get promoted, and it was an FP&A role that I applied for. I'm like, hey, get paid more? Okay, FP&A, whatever. That sounds good. And little did I know I'd spend pretty much the rest of my career there until about a year and a half ago when I started my own business. I got into that from first building a following on LinkedIn. A number of things happened where someone reached out, hey, can you help me build a training course? Another person reached out with consulting. And a couple of vendors reached out to me with different offers. And I looked at all this and said, hey, I can turn this into a business. And, at first I mentioned it to my wife and she kind of looked at me like I was crazy at first because I really hadn't made any money off this. And she's like, wait, our family business? What? And so we talked about it for about 6 weeks, and she was comfortable at that point and put in my notice and, worked for him part-time for a few months and then started my own business talking about FP&A, training people, sharing resources, just, content all around FP&A and finance.
Now, what are the main ways that, companies might engage you to help them?
Yeah, so there's really a couple different ways, but most companies are going to engage me for training. So I partner with a guy out of Canada for a lot of the training we do. Sometimes I'll do it on my own, but I have Excel courses, data visualization, data storytelling, best practice FP&A, cash flow. And we've trained a number of companies, been fortunate to work with some global 500 companies, both in the US and Canada. So that's typically what they'll engage us for. Sometimes it might be a couple hour session to an all day, or could even be a couple days depending on what they need. So we work with them to customize the training, but we have some standard courses as well that we offer. And so that's the first way. The second way, I work with a lot of more software vendors around sometimes doing webinars with them, educational content to help them reach their audience and also reach my audience where they may sponsor something that's educational.
Yeah, no, that's great. I know, many companies out there, they hear all the latest buzzwords, things like, you should be using AI, you should be using dashboards and visualizations, you should be doing this, you should be doing that. And one of the biggest challenges that I'm seeing, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing, is just in terms of how do we get started, right? Like you don't want to necessarily buy a product when you don't know the foundational concepts of it. You almost need that primer course in there of what should my expectations be with I want to get into dashboarding, I want to get into AI, I want to get into you name it. And and then once you have an understanding of what the capabilities are, that's the point in which you should really start looking at, okay, what vendor is going to be the best to get me to where I want to go.
Yeah, I mean, definitely there's like, let's just take AI, for example. I think everybody wants to get involved in AI. They're seeing it and they're hearing all these use cases where it can save time. But, it's really a journey. So I generally encourage anyone at this point, start experimenting with it. Make sure you understand your company's policies, the privacy around it, and you're never giving anything to a public open source AI tool that would get you in trouble. If you wouldn't post it online, don't put it in ChatGPT or Claude or these different tools, but start experimenting at least at a minimum. Start learning how it can help you and understanding it. Because over time, there'll be more and more enterprise applications. We're already seeing it. As far as companies in the buying side, I think it's good to ask the company, hey, how do you think about AI? What are ways you can streamline my work using AI? What are you doing? But also remembering it's not the end all be all. And if you don't have AI everywhere, you're not going to fall apart as a company. I think sometimes there's this fear of missing out, right? The FOMO that, oh no, everybody's using it. Yes and no is definitely the answer there. And so I always, caution people, whatever solution they're looking at, the first thing, even going back before AI and any of that, is strategically, what are you trying to accomplish? What are your needs? What is important to you as a business and why do you need to do it? What's it going to look like in 5 years? And just asking all those questions, Daniel, having implemented different tools and ERPs, a lot of times people want to jump into a project without having really thought about all the downstream implications and what they're trying to accomplish. And that's just a recipe for failure, whether it's AI, whether it's an ERP, whether it's an FP&A tool. If you don't do that homework, that transformation, which I really think more is an evolution than just a transformation, isn't going to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you raise a lot of good points. And it's a big reason why I started the show is that what I found is there are a lot of companies out there that are just following the buzzwords of, I'm going to implement AI for the sake of implementing AI. I'm going to put in dashboards because everybody's telling me you need the pretty charts and diagrams on there in order to, get, in order for your business to run. And they say, okay, great. I'm putting in AI. I'm going to, budget this amount of money to put in dashboards. And, they go in and they don't really know what they're going to accomplish other than checking the box that they are. And, in many cases, there are many organizations out there that should be implementing this stuff that aren't implementing it because they don't have the knowledge that the technology exists or, what it does and how it helps their goals. So, I think, one of the things that I always like to push is don't wait until you buy a piece of software or, implement a process to understand what it does and its capabilities are. You should know that going in. And, training often, gets confused where you get trained at the end of some kind of implementation, whether it's putting in a model, putting in a technology, whatever. And that's when okay, here's how to use it. But you miss a lot when you wait till the end to learn what the capabilities are versus knowing those capabilities up front.
Really, capabilities should be part of that RFP process, at least the core capabilities. Are you going to know everything about a tool? Of course not. That's why you have training. But you better understand the core capabilities and how they work with your other tools and your process and your company if you want to be successful. And I kind of laugh when you say a lot of times people, wanting AI or whatever, but don't really understand the software. I bet, I don't know, 50, 100 emails since I started doing this where people have asked me, what's the best FP&A tool? Like, okay, there's 140 planning tools in the market. You really expect me to be able to say, yep, this is the one you buy.
Yeah.
What's your company size? What's your industry? What's your processes? Do you want to be in Excel? Do you not want to be in Excel? Do you want it on top of a BI platform? Like, there's so many questions that can be asked that's usually where I'll go to is like, okay, I need to know some information. If you want to have a quick talk, I can narrow it down and give you 5 or 6 tools I think would be good to look at depending on your situation. But never am I going to say, hey, yes, this is the tool for you. Go buy it. Because then you'll come back and blame me when it doesn't work. And 2, there isn't a best tool.
Right. They all have trade-offs and areas where they excel. And part of the process is, understanding that. And that's why, I get customers' frustration sometimes when they ask you a question and the answer is it depends. Right. But, it's not necessarily just about the question. It's about the understanding of what does it depend on, right? And what factors play into it. So I hate the answer when someone says it depends, but when it's, hey, it depends, but here are the things to think about, that helps guide in the right direction to where we need to be. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I was going to say, I totally agree. When someone just gives it depends and ends it there, that's just frustrating. But if they explain why it depends and why you're thinking about it, like, somebody will tell me, well, I have a on-prem ERP. If someone tells me they have an on-prem ERP, I'm generally going to say, okay, you probably want to go with a more established tool that's been in the market a little longer, because a lot of the newer tools are all connectors and looking to cloud initially, because it takes time to work with on-prem, right? Or just the list goes on and on of those type of questions. And then you can say, all right, now I can help guide you because you've given me some of those things to narrow it down to from it depends to here's some good options based on what you've told me.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's 100% right there. Are there particular trainings that you typically recommend prior to customer says, hey, I want to implement a new ERP? Is there something where you say, hey, before we get into that, you might want to look at this to get a better understanding?
Sure. So I don't get into the implementation side with the customers I'm dealing with. I mostly just provide market advice. So I haven't really had to answer that question. But when it comes to FP&A, let's talk FP&A tools and ERPs. I mean, I think generally the training people are going to want is they should take some kind of training offered by the vendor or someone who's an approved to train on that tool. I generally wouldn't go out to just anyone and say, hey, train me on Oracle, right? Or train me on Anaplan. There's generally enough approved resources that you'll get a good training course. I think everybody should look to have that be part of a package when you're installing a software in your cost. You should negotiate that in to have training, because if you don't, you're not going to utilize the tool like you should. Even if you do have training, you still might not utilize the tool if you don't have the right strategy and communication. But without training, you're just setting yourself up for that much more pain.
Sure. Yeah, no, that's great. And, I think that is a good segue for us a little bit into, the work you're doing with the FP&A software. I know that, you've come out with your, third gen FP&A tools market guide. And, want to talk a little bit about that. So do you want to maybe introduce it a little bit and just kind of talk about what you're doing with the tools, your general market guide, and, we can kind of go from there.
Sure. So I'll tell a little kind of backstory. It's funny how I got into this is I had an Excel website, and, I'd built a following on LinkedIn of a few thousand, and I had actually applied to work for a couple FP&A software vendors. So I posted about them on LinkedIn in hopes of getting the job, right? Full transparency. That's how it started. And then, companies reached out to me and said, hey, we have this new tool. Would you demo it? And I kind of thought, why not? Let's see if there's something there. Excel is a super crowded space to be writing about. Maybe I can carve out a niche here. And so I started talking to them. And then someone reached out to me and said, hey, you've met with a lot of these vendors. We're thinking of putting together a guide. They called Third Generation. It was Anders Lou Lindberg and Wouter Born. And so the three of us said, yeah, let's put together this guide. So we did one last year. It came out in 2022. I think it was late September, October, somewhere in there. And then we're revising it right now. and we're going to release that in January. And so, with that, I've probably done demos of 80 plus tools in the marketplace. I've met with maybe 60 CEOs. There were weeks where I'd get contacted by 2 or 3 people. I mean, I still just in the last month saw 2 or 3 new tools out there. It's amazing how often I hear of stuff. I'm like, okay, how many can you have in the market? I mean, my spreadsheet is, I want to say now it's about 150 that I keep track of. Now, a couple have closed, different things have happened, but it's pretty close to 150 that are active out there or starting something. And it's just amazing to me how much this market has grown. And so really for me, the idea with the third gen guide, I mean, there were a couple purposes. One, introducing people to new tools. Two, from a business standpoint, I wanted to do something that wasn't primarily covered by Gartner and Forrester. Hence the newer tools versus all the established players, because it's much harder to, offer unique insights when everybody's covering them. And so that's kind of how it came about. And now, I've been known as, in addition to the FP&A guy, just a reputation for the FP&A software and knowing it well. And it's led to a lot of, business opportunities. And I've developed great relationships with a lot of these vendors. But one thing I've done is, yes, I'll do not promotional, but educational, like events with them, and I'll promote them, educational content. The one thing I don't do is I get no kickbacks from any of the vendors. I've had many of them approach me and say, hey, if you refer us, we'll pay your referral fee. But I'm like, I don't want to do that because then people will be like, you're biased when I do my product reviews. I've never had a vendor pay me for a product review. I've had ones offer, and I always immediately say, sorry, I just don't do that. I keep these separate for a deliberate reason to try to limit, the bias that creeps in. I mean, I'm human. There's always going to be that risk, but I try as much as I can to put everything in place. Like I've had vendors offer me equity to, serve on a kind of advisory board for them. And I always say, if you want to pay me an hourly rate, we can talk. But as soon as you want equity, I just can't do it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And, that's something that, I've always struggled with too, is that, I want to be independent. There are vendors out there that say, oh, hey, if you refer a client to us, we're going to pay you X. And, in the past, what I used to do was say, I'm not going to take any particular fee from this. Just give the customer the best deal you possibly can and take it out of there. And then I found that there were a bunch of vendors that were telling me they were doing that, and it turned out that they weren't. So, what I end up doing with customers is I say, look, if there's any kind of, fee that's gonna come to me at the end of this, I'm gonna take that off of your implementation bill if I'm the one doing the implementation. If I'm not doing the implementation, then that's fine. I just, will decline the fee from them. But I just don't want to be in a spot where, even if it's not biased, there's that perception of, well, hey, these guys gave you $5,000 to go and sell their product over there. So how do I know I'm getting, the best deal here?
And I love that you're doing that because it shows you're putting the customer first, and the customers will notice and appreciate that. It makes a difference over the long run. Yes. Can you make more money? Like I could have made a lot more money at this point if I'd done the referral fees. But I said, long term, that's not what's best for me, for my customers, or for my business.
Right. And that's even why I got into, why I started my own company to do the implementations too, is I worked for a large consulting company and found a better way of doing, some consulting work for a customer, and they told me, hey, if you use that tool that you developed, then we're going to fire you because that means less consulting revenue for us. I said, well, why can't I just do the best thing for the customer? Why do I have to do it? Isn't that what's going to make us the most money in the long term? And it turns out that not everyone shares that same belief. So it's great that that me and you are on the same page about that.
Yeah, I completely understand. And unfortunately, not everyone shares that belief. Like you said, often it's about how many hours can I bill, not what's best for the client.
Right. So tell me, I know you mentioned that, you're differentiating yourself with this guide versus, something like the Gartner report. Like where are you guys different? Where do you think that you're kind of filling a void that, that they have?
Great question. So I think the first thing is we're really focusing on the small. Most of the tools are small to mid market. They're more recent tools. Many of them are Series A, Series B. If you go look at Gartner, most of the tools Gartner covers are 10, 15 years old. They're established players. They've had a long time in the market. To be considered third gen, you've had to be a newer tool. I mean, I think the oldest tool we had in there was 7, 8 years ago. In the guide. Most I'd say are in the last 5 years. And so that's where it's different is the tools we're covering generally don't get a lot of coverage because they haven't hit that traction point. Some of them may only be, $1 million in revenue or whatever, relatively small. Whereas, an Anaplan's 300-400 million in revenue. And so it's really helping people be familiar with what's new that's out there. Because so often in finance, you hear people say, nobody ever got fired for implementing Oracle or TM1 or SAP. And those can be good tools and they might be the right choice. But that's not the way you want people to look at it. You want them to be aware of all the other newer tools that are out there because sometimes they may be a lot better choice and they may be happier that they did that. And so it's really trying to help the market be aware that no matter your size, there are options today, even for planning tools, just like there's options for, accounting software. Obviously QuickBooks and those aren't a full ERP, but they're still an accounting software. And, they're filling that gap until you get bigger and really need a full ERP, an Oracle or an SAP or a Sage or whoever. And so that's really the kind of the gap we're trying to fill in the marketplace. And almost all the tools we reference generally are, venture backed VC types that are, looking for that hyper growth. And, some of them will be the next big company. And some of them, as always the case, will go under. Like there's some from last year's guide that are now out of business.
So what size companies do you recommend like to consider these types of tools versus, a old established, type of tool like an Oracle, like an SAP?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, right, there's really kind of a couple things. There's the first of when's the right time to get off Excel? And that's going to vary for every company. Basically, when you hit that point where you really need a good collaborative tool, you need privacy, you need data integration, you're constantly in Excel hell, it's time to consider something. Now, if you're huge scale, very established, on-prem, probably some of the older ones, there's only a few of the new ones that can really handle a big, huge company. Like, you take an Amex or an American Express or some of these big companies. So when I'm talking to someone that's a huge multinational, I'm going to steer them toward older tools primarily because generally they've had the development and the time. The newer tools, not quite there. I may mention one or two newer tools to look at that are focused on the enterprise market. The reality is almost all these, if you look at it, we've kind of broken into the first gen, second gen, third gen, your first gen being your old Oracle, your IBM, your SAP, a few other tools, right? And almost all your first gen now are big, established, focusing on multinationals primarily. Yes, do they come downscale some, but none of them are going to do a startup, right? TM1 or IBM is going to be overkill for a company doing $1 million in revenue. The cost wouldn't make sense. And so then your second gen really came in and said, hey, we want to support more of that mid-market, shorten the implementation time, started to go cloud-based. That's your tools like Vena, JDocs, Profix, Adaptive, a lot of those that came about, late 90s, 2000s, probably more 2000 to 2010, a little after. The third gen tools, a lot of them is focused on the smaller to mid-market. Like some of them focus on startups. Some of them are saying, hey, you should have less than 250 employees, right? Oracle's not going to touch someone with less than 250 employees. The cost doesn't make sense. And so, when someone's a smaller company that they want something, they're done with Excel, they'd like a little bit more than that, then I start recommending these companies and it goes up from there. There's a couple second gen, like Pigment's probably a tool you may have heard of. They're a lot like Anaplan, but a little bit more of a modern, been out for a couple of years. There's someone I might recommend to a large vendor or a Vereto. But then the rest of those tools are mostly in that small to mid market. And so that's really how I look at it is, okay, what size are you? Do you want to say in Excel, what's important to you? And then you kind of know how to help them start thinking about it and why we're different from the other guides in that we're more focusing on the newer tools to just make people aware that, hey, you got options more than the 3 tools you've heard about your whole life.
And I think that that's where a lot of companies, I don't want to say go wrong, but tend to veer off, is that there's that mentality of it was always done this way, so that I always have to do it this way going forward. Versus, to your point of, hey, there are several hundred tools out there that you may not have even known about that may fulfill your requirements more. But what ends up tending to happen is companies choose here are the 2 or 3 vendors that I'm going to bring to an RFP, and then I'm going to go and start carving around requirements based on what those guys can and can't do, versus what do I actually need, and then what is the best tool to fulfill what I need.
Yep, exactly.
So I guess, how do you mitigate where, I know you mentioned that there's some vendors that are on that in the guide that, maybe they were around a year or 2 ago that are no longer, in place today. For companies that I guess are a little bit nervous about, hey, how do I know that I choose a vendor today and, I'm going to be able to continue on their technology 5-10 years down the road? How do you alleviate any of those, kinds of concerns?
I mean, it's a great question. So if we look at last year's guide, there's one tool that has closed. And there's others that I know haven't gained the traction they'd like. But what I tell people is, look, when you're looking at newer tools, you need to be careful. You do need to do your homework. Here's what I can tell you. The ones we select in the guide have got the most traction of newer tools, but there's always a risk. These are VC backed. If your number one concern is, hey, could this company potentially go under? Then you need to make sure that's part of your criteria to understand, okay, how many customers do they have? Where's their growth at? How comfortable am I that they'll be able to support me in a few years? Because yes, there is always that risk. The risk becomes less and less the more established the player. Like, right, the chances of Oracle going bankrupt in the next 5 years is minuscule. Much, much lower than somebody that's a seed company or a Series A or a Series B. And so, when we recommend those, it's kind of understanding the risk tolerance of the person and making sure they understand what the potential risks are depending on where that tool is in its life cycle.
That makes sense. What criteria do you look for in terms of, getting the company, in your report, any evaluation criteria that you have there?
Yeah, so I can share some high level. We haven't shared all the details, but what we did this year is it started with, I think, 50 something tools we sent an email out to. Basic email where we asked a number of questions. We wanted to see growth. We wanted to get a general idea of where their revenue was. We wanted to make sure they could support, ERP, generally, in most cases, with a few exceptions, CRM and HR integration into the tool. We wanted to, can they understand some basic things? We also asked that, hey, are you willing to make a founder available for a founder story? We asked about a potential test demo environment. We're going to do some testing of these software and work with them. So that was the first phase. Then as a second phase, we sent out a more detailed questionnaire once we'd narrowed the list down so we didn't have everybody spend a bunch of time. And so then we asked more details. And we asked them how they'd segment themselves so we can show that on a grid, and what's their ideal customer and their target market and a bunch of things. And then we went through and did a demo with each of them and a founder story. So we spent that time with them. We also asked them to provide references to 3 customers. We sent out a survey to all of those customers. And then as a final step, either they'll walk us through it or we'll do it ourselves. Many of them are giving us access to the tool to test a use case. So it started from, all right, what are all the new tools that are out there? Looking at that and saying, okay, which ones do we think have traction and really are the leaders in the space based on, various things, whether it's growth, revenue, integrations, a number of different criteria. And now we've narrowed that list down and we're going through the final steps of putting that together, finalizing the testing, writing it up. And in some places, the vendor removes themselves. Like there's some vendors that, all else equal, we may have included in the guide, but they chose not to continue, right? Nothing I can do about that. Not everybody necessarily wants to participate, but for the most part, I think we did capture all the main tools in the market, both last year and this year. I think in general, they've been very receptive. But, there's always a few that just don't respond. That's just life.
Yeah, no, you're never going to get 100%.
Exactly. You're never going to bat 100 for whatever reason. You always have somebody that plays hard to get, so to speak.
Yeah. No, that's good information. So I guess since you and the team have evaluated a lot of tools, like what are you seeing like emerging in terms of like, are there key features that that you're seeing in some of these newer vendors that you're not seeing in some of the older technology?
So I'll split that question in two areas. I think first I'll talk a little bit about some of the trends that just in general I predicted at the beginning of the year that I thought we'd see in the marketplace. One is we've seen a little bit of product-led growth. Again, that's smaller companies. Causal is a great example of that. Telemetry, Finmark, where they don't have a sales team. They're using a very basic implementation. Or in some cases like Causal, it's really you just build the financial model. And so we've definitely seen growth in that. And I think that's really interesting. The other areas we've seen is we've seen more and more tools being built on top of BI, right? You're seeing a convergence between planning and analytics, which isn't surprising since FP&A is planning and analytics just for finance. And so you're seeing a number of companies that said, look, we're going to provide you a planning tool on top of Power BI or on top of Click or Tableau or whatever it might be. And so we've definitely seen a growth there. And that's something I talked about. We're starting to see a little more consolidation in the marketplace. Whether that be some acquisitions, we've seen Bill.com acquire someone, we've seen Insight Software, Brex. I expect that to accelerate. We've seen a few tools come out, drop out of the market. AI, obviously that's a huge one we've seen just across the market is how you're going to implement it. What I think is different with the third gen tools in particular is they're generally a shorter implementation time. They're really very heavily focused on that time to value. Some other things they've done really well is the tool has been very much built from a strategic finance standpoint of how do we allow the whole company to get into the tool, often different licensing that makes that easier than some of your bigger tools. And especially historically, it's been, okay, nobody but FP&A gets into the FP&A tool. And they're really trying to change that. In many cases, people are building the board decks. I wouldn't say in many, but in some, they're building the board decks right in the tool and sharing them out. Right? They're doing their monthly report right in the tool and sharing it out. And so the users are going into it. And I think those are some of the big things we're seeing these third gen push is, quicker time to value, lower implementation, a heavier focus on really that low code and no code because the technology is newer and it's easier to do. And then just that being able to have the whole company use it. I think those are some of the things they're pushing. And we see the first and second gen also working on that. It's not like it's unique and only third gen's doing that. But you see a greater emphasis on it, especially given, they're often using much newer technology. They don't have some of the legacy challenges that the original players have.
Right, because the good is also the bad when it comes to the older technology being, well, it's proven, it's worked for 30, 40 years. Well, it's also been on a platform or 30, 40 years old that may not have been optimized for current stacks today. And, maybe you're losing value in some way, whether it's performance, whether it's lack of capabilities, maybe there are other considerations out there. But are you seeing, many of the newer technologies that are coming, does there seem to be a big shift one way or another in terms of cloud, non-cloud? Do they all seem to be cloud-based?
Yeah, pretty much. When we look at third gen, one of the requirements says they pretty much had to be cloud-based. Now, they may, in some cases, support something on-prem just because the customer needs that, but they're cloud-based tools. They're pretty much all have native integrations. And then many of them will also use an API and other things because native integrations do not work 100% of the time, as you know, Daniel. In no scenario could you expect all your customers to be like, yep, native, we're good. Just standard, go out of the box. We only wish.
Yeah,
So,
I mean, one thing that I'm seeing in the market is, we've moved from a shift of, I'm going to buy the one vendor that makes, those 20 different, the vendor that makes the CRM, that also makes the planning software, that also makes this, because it's all the same company. So it's got the best integration to, now I'm going to pick the best of breed, best in class for each function. And it's great. It comes with its own set of challenges of, how do you integrate all these systems together where, you have your CRM data in one particular system, you have your FP&A data in another system, you have your HCM data in another system, and how do you bring it all together? So it definitely does bring its own challenges with the move to the cloud.
no, 100% agree. And I think, you're seeing a challenge too is companies have BI tools, they put the data there. Then a lot of that data is also put into an FP&A software. And I think that's why you're seeing some people just saying, hey, look, I'm just going to build it on top of my BI tool. And at some point, I really think you'll see a better data layer where we're all plugging into really kind of one source for all these different tools and we're just putting our rules on top of it, but we're not there yet.
Yeah. Do you see, because, what I see I work, I guess, majority with the older type vendors, the Oracles, the IBMs, et cetera. But, there's kind of that messaging of, you should hate spreadsheets. And, even though they all have spreadsheet plugins for Excel and support, users interacting in spreadsheets. But are you seeing, like, I know, like companies like Villani and Sarah, we're going to bring this functionality to your spreadsheets. And there are other, companies out there that are, don't go into the spreadsheet, go into our software and, do all this. And like, do you still kind of see that divide in the third gen tools that you've been working with, or does it seem to be?
I mean, you definitely see it a little bit, but I think there's much more of an acknowledgement today that, look, you got to work with spreadsheets. This old idea of every new tool wasn't a spreadsheet killer. I think 40 years has demonstrated the spreadsheet's not going anywhere. Now, some may say, hey, we're going to build our own spreadsheet in our tool, and you should use it because of the multidimensional modeling benefits, which is fine. But I often will segment the market from spreadsheet add-in to spreadsheet native to basically web app with different levels of spreadsheet integration, from low integration to replacement or from high integration to replacement. And I think people kind of resonate with that. We've definitely seen more embrace Excel. Data Rels has had a lot of success with it. Aleph just raised 16 million. They work with both Google Sheets and Excel. Cube has raised quite a bit. They work with both. I just learned one in Australia called XP&A. And so we're definitely seeing quite a few that have said, you mentioned Vena already. And, TM1 really is at, yes, it's not a spreadsheet native, but it has a very high integration. And I've seen others like that. And so I think there's more of an acknowledgement today that if people want to use Excel and just load it back to the database, we should accommodate that.
Yeah, no, that's great. Are you seeing, so, I know Excel is really the standard when it comes to, financial modeling. I know Google's been trying to make a big push to, use our spreadsheets instead. But, with the technologies out there, are you seeing more support, less support, similar support for like, something like Google Sheets versus Excel, or does it seem to be still very heavy Excel?
I mean, it's still overall Excel, but we're definitely seeing more tools that have some level of integration with Google Sheets. I try to call that out on my spreadsheet when I map things with a different color of, hey, if they also work with Google Sheets or they're primarily Google Sheets. But it's definitely still an Excel world. And even on the spreadsheet side, you're starting to see some new, more modern spreadsheets try to, carve out a niche, which is very difficult to do, right? You're going up against two 1,600-pound gorillas. Forget 800, right? They're the elephants in the room. But Equals has done some good things. There's one called Rose, spreadsheet.com, Spreadsheet Rocks, with varying levels of success. But you're seeing some unique things that they're trying to do just on the spreadsheet side.
Now, in your like your training, your podcast for with the financial modeling, are you um, like talking about just general concepts of like, hey, this is tool agnostic in terms of whether it's a Excel, Google Sheet, et cetera, or are you, able to kind of cater to regardless of what your spreadsheet is, here are tips and tricks.
Yeah, I mean, generally, we're talking story and modeling advice. We'll sometimes ask for some technical stuff, but generally, when we're asking things, it's almost always Excel that everybody's modeled in. Not that we necessarily say, hey, what are you doing in Excel? There may be some episodes like that. At the end, we do ask an Excel based question, just an acknowledgement that nearly everybody has financial modeling. So we have this rapid fire section, which is many people's favorite section. We give 10 answers or 10 questions and we tell them, you got 10 seconds and you can't tell me it depends. You got to pick a side. And so, one of the questions we ask is, will Excel ever die? So far, it's about 50-50, right? Some people say yes, some say no. And so it's always interesting. And, we'll ask other questions like VBA. That's really Excel based. Google doesn't have that because the reality is anyone who's making a career out of financial modeling, I'd say 99% are using Excel. Occasionally Google Sheets, but that's just the world we live in right now.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, I see some like, more like tech startups, West Coast that are, that might, have Google Sheets in there, but I have to say probably out of the 50, 60 plus customers that I've worked with, maybe one or two have said, here's our Google Sheet process to do our financial modeling versus Excel.
And it tends to be startups and it tends to be FP&A, right? None of the investment banking houses that I am aware of, any of them are teaching how to model in Google Sheets. And since I'm doing financial modeling across all of it, M&A, right? 99.9% of your M&A transactions happen in Excel. Say the one area we're seeing a little more of an inroads is really in the FP&A area where people are planning and budgeting. And it's a small company that says, we're going to use Google as our, office suite. Therefore, figure out Google Sheets. And even in some of those places, I know people say, nope, they want to hand them an Apple and give them Google. It's like, I want Excel and I want a PC because it's different.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I think this is all great information that you've provided us today. We definitely appreciate the time and the insights that you have. And I know we're coming short on time over here, but we're going to link each of the different things we talked about, your podcast, the if you have a site for your training, the where we can get that third gen FP&A guide once it comes out, so that everybody has access to it. But like I said, we really appreciate it. Do you have any, I guess, final words of wisdom or just general advice for anyone just looking to make an investment in improving their FP&A capabilities? Lessons learned. General things that you typically advise. Yeah, so that's definitely true. And I too often see someone just trying to implement technology for the sake of implementing technology because everyone else is doing it. you name it as the reason behind it, everything other than because we actually need this, or we've evaluated this is how we're going to, get the most bang for our buck over here. So that couldn't be truer over there. But I think one of the main reasons why I said, hey, I have to have Paul on the show over here is, you put out a ton of content. I follow you on LinkedIn. I know not only are you putting out your own content over there, you're constantly reinforcing other people's content that's out there as well, and sharing that. I guess for our audience, the best way to follow you, would it be following you on LinkedIn? Are there other social channels that you think that people should check out?
Yeah, so I would say LinkedIn is the number one. You can also go to my website, thefpnaguy.com. I am on the other social media channels, but not near as active. Probably you're going to see the most content on YouTube. But I have a TikTok, I have an Instagram, I have a Twitter, but they're all very small, and I'm not anywhere near as active as LinkedIn on those.
Awesome. That sounds great. Well, Paul, we really appreciate the time that you spent with us. You've provided us a lot of great insight for those viewing and listening to the show over here. Please like us, comment, subscribe to the channel so we could bring other great guests like Paul on the show. Paul, it was great having you on here today.
Thank you for having me. I really enjoyed it, and I hope your audience enjoys the conversation.